Polish people survived all of it. But where did they actually come from? The answer is written in their DNA. Poland, a country in the middle of Europe that has been invaded and divided up, wiped off maps, and reborn not once but many times. And through all of it, Polish people survived. But where do the Polish actually come from? Are they the direct children of old Slavic tribes who settled the flatlands of Central Europe thousands of years ago? Or is the genetic story much more complicated? Shaped by waves of people moving from place to place? Scientists have been working hard on this question for decades, and now ancient DNA is finally giving us answers. Some of them are really surprising. In this video, we're going to walk through the genetic origin of the Polish people, where the science is right now, how it fits with the history, and why this story has more layers than most people realize. We'll cover the geography, the language clue that tells us something important about Polish roots, what Polish people actually look like in their genes, the long-running academic fight over where Poles came from, and what the latest DNA study has shown us. By the end, you'll have a clearer picture of what makes Polish genetic identity so fascinating and so debated. Let's start with where Poland sits today, because geography is everything when it comes to understanding genetics. Poland is home to about 38 million people, making it the fifth biggest country in the European Union. It sits on a huge flat land, the North European plain, with no big natural borders to the east or west. That's not a small detail. It means Poland has been wide open to movement, migration, and invasion from all directions for thousands of years. To the west, Germany. To the east, Ukraine and Belarus. To the north, the Baltic Sea and the mountains of the Carpathians and Sudetes in the south, which do offer some natural protection. But historically, armies and peoples moved through Poland constantly. The country has been called the crossroads of Europe, for a good reason. Modern Poland is very ethnically uniform. Over 97% of residents say they are Polish, but that sameness is actually a recent historical development, a result of the terrible population shift during and after World War II. Before the 20th century, Poland was one of the most mixed regions in Europe, home to large communities of Germans, Jews, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians. Understanding that difference between today's sameness and centuries of mixing is essential for understanding Polish genetics. So, if Poland sits at this open crossroads of Europe, what does the language tell us about who was here first? Here's a clue that often gets missed. The language. Polish is a West Slavic language closely related to Czech and Slovak, and more distantly to Russian, Ukrainian, and the other Slavic tongues. It's part of the Indo-European language family, which means Polish, like English, German, Greek, and Hindi, goes way back to a common old language spoken thousands of years ago somewhere on the Eurasian steppe. Now, language and genes don't always go together. A group of people can pick up a new language through conquest or cultural pressure without changing their biology. But in this case, the Slavic language of Poland is a real marker heritage because Slavic-speaking peoples are one of the key groups in Poland's genetic story. The Slavic expansion is one of the great mysteries of European history. In the early medieval period, Slavic-speaking groups spread quickly across a huge stretch of Central and Eastern Europe, from the Balkans to the Baltic. They didn't leave much written history behind, but they left their genes. And this is where the DNA story begins to get interesting, because the question isn't just, were the Poles always Slavic? The deeper question is, who are the people living in the Polish territory before the Slavic expansion, and how much of their family line survived? But before we get there, let's talk about something people often notice first: what Polish people look like. Genetics and physical appearance are connected, but the connection is never simple. Still, it's worth saying something about what most people think of as Polish appearance because it ties directly into the population history. The typical image of a Pole, light skin, fair or medium hair, blue or gray eyes, is real on the whole, but it doesn't show the full picture. Poland sits in a zone of gradual change. As you move from northwest to southeast across Poland, you see a slight increase in darker hair and eyes, showing the different migration histories of those regions. Studies on Polish pigmentation genetics show that lighter features, such as fair skin and blue eyes, are strongly linked with old ancestry from ancient Scandinavian hunter-gatherers and later Bronze Age steppe peoples. Both groups gave a lot of their genes to northern and central European populations. Poles carry a lot of ancestry from both. But here's what's interesting. Lighter pigmentation in Europeans isn't as old as people think. The genetic differences that produce light skin and blue eyes were not common in Europe during the Stone Age. They became common only after certain migrations from both the Eurasian steppe and from Scandinavia brought those gene differences into Central Europe in large numbers. In other words, what we think of as typically Polish appearance is itself the product of migration. The physical traits are a clue pointing right toward the genetic ancestry. Now, let's go back in time and understand the historical record, because there's been a serious academic debate about Polish origins for over a century. To understand the genetic debate, you need the historical context first. The usual story of Polish origins goes like this. In the early medieval period, Slavic tribes settled the territory of modern Poland. By the 9th and 10th centuries, one tribe, the Polans, became the strongest tribe in the region around the Warta River. Their leader, Duke Mieszko I, brought together the surrounding tribes and in 966 accepted Christian baptism. That moment is generally treated as the founding of the Polish state. But who were the Slavic tribes that settled here? And what happened to the people who lived in this territory before them? Before the Slavic expansion, the Polish territory was home to several different groups. During the Bronze and Iron Ages, Germanic-speaking peoples lived in much of what is now Poland. Further back, during the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, there were farming communities that had moved from Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, thousands of years earlier, and before them, hunter-gatherers who had lived in Europe since the Ice Age. The big historical question is, when the Slavic speakers arrived, did they replace the people already living here, or did they mix with them? This question has huge effects, not just for understanding the past, but for modern national identity. And it's a question that historians couldn't fully answer with documents and archaeology alone. There are two broad schools of thought on this, and they've been arguing for decades. The first is the autochthonous theory, sometimes called the indigenous theory. It says that Slavic-speaking peoples have been in Central Europe for thousands of years, that they didn't move in during the early medieval period, but were always there, simply changing culturally over time. Under this view, Poles are basically the long-time inhabitants of their land, going all the way back to the earliest farming communities of the region. This theory has a clear appeal for Polish national identity. It roots the Polish people in their soil, not as latecomers or migrants, but as the original inhabitants. Polish archaeologists, especially in the communist era, often supported versions of this theory because it matched political stories about Polish land rights, especially regarding the Western territories taken from Germany after World War II. The second school, the migration theory, says the opposite. It says that Slavic speakers spread quickly into Central Europe from a homeland somewhere further east, likely in modern Ukraine or Belarus during the 5th to 7th centuries. Under this model, the people in Poland before that expansion spoke different languages and had different cultural traditions. The Slavic takeover was fairly fast. German archaeologists and historians, especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries, sometimes pushed strong versions of the migration theory, partly for their own political reasons, to argue that Germanic peoples had earlier claims to territories that later became Polish. So, both sides of this debate have been shaped by politics as much as science. The question was never purely academic. It was about who belongs where and who got there first. Over the last 10 to 15 years, ancient DNA research has changed what we know about European prehistory. Scientists can now take genetic material from ancient human remains and compare it directly to modern populations. So, what does the DNA actually say about the genetic origin of the Polish people? Let's start with what modern Poles look like genetically. Studies from institutions, including the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and research groups across Poland and Germany, have found that modern Poles carry a mix of three main ancient ancestry parts. First, Western hunter-gatherer ancestry from the people who lived in Europe after the last Ice Age, before farming arrived. Second, early European farmer ancestry from Neolithic migrants who came from Anatolia roughly 8,000 to 9,000 years ago and brought farming to Europe. And third, steppe ancestry from Bronze Age migrants who moved into Europe from the Pontic-Caspian steppe north of Black Sea roughly 5,000 years ago. These steppe peoples are linked with the Yamnaya culture and are now understood to have greatly changed the genetics of most of northern and central Europe. Polish people carry fairly high levels of that steppe ancestry compared to many other European populations, higher than southern Europeans, and at a level comparable to other North Central European peoples. This fits with the strong Bronze Age steppe migrations that affected the region. Now, what about the Slavic expansion? A major 2022 study published in the journal Nature, led by researchers from Harvard, the Max Planck Institute, and institutions across Eastern Europe, looked at ancient DNA from early medieval Slavic period individuals across Central and Eastern Europe, including sites in Poland. The findings were striking. The early medieval individuals linked with Slavic culture in Poland showed a genetic profile that was not very different from the earlier Bronze and Iron Age populations of the same region. In other words, the Slavic expansion into Poland did not involve the replacement of the people already living there. The people who were here before were mostly absorbed, not pushed out. This is a significant finding. It suggests a level of population continuity that the pure migration supporters had underestimated. But it also confirms that the Slavic cultural identity spread quickly and changed the region. It was more of a cultural and language change than a completely demographic one. On haplogroups, the most common Y chromosome haplogroup in Poland is R1a, especially the R1am458 branch, which is strongly linked with Slavic and Central European populations. This haplogroup is found in roughly 55 to 60% of Polish men. The next most common is I2, linked with older European lineages, and R1b, more common in Western Europe. On the mother's side, Poles show a mix of mitochondrial haplogroups common across Central and Northern Europe, showing the layered migrations of the past. Here's something that researchers in population genetics often point out with frustration. DNA findings don't automatically settle identity debates. People don't simply change their sense of who they are based on a scientific paper. In Poland, national identity has been built through centuries of struggle. The country was divided up and erased off the map completely from 1795 to 1918, split between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. It was invaded from the west and the east during World War II, losing 6 million citizens, including nearly the entire pre-war Jewish population. The post-war borders were redrawn. Whole populations were moved, and the country had to rebuild its identity under Soviet-imposed communism. That kind of history creates a deep, strong attachment to national identity. And for many Poles, that identity is rooted in a sense of being ancient, of having always been here in this land, as a distinct and lasting people. Despite the debates, Polish pride in their heritage runs very deep. Poles have a strong tradition of cultural memory, keeping their language, literature, and national identity, even when the state itself stopped existing. The genetic story, in all its complexity, only supports what history already shows. This is a people with amazing resilience and a many-layered past they can be proud of. Here is the most honest summary of what science currently tells us about the genetic origin of the Polish people. Poles are a layered population, just like all Europeans. Their ancestry includes Ice Age hunter-gatherers who lived in Europe long before farming arrived, Neolithic farmers who moved from Anatolia thousands of years later, Bronze Age steppe migrants whose arrival changed the genetics of much of Northern and Central Europe, Iron Age and early medieval populations of the region, and the Slavic culture expansion of the early medieval period, which was more of a cultural and language change than a complete population replacement. The autochthonous theory, the idea that Poles have been in their territory forever unchanged, doesn't hold up to genetic scrutiny. The steppe migrations alone represent a major demographic shift, but the complete replacement model doesn't hold either. There is real continuity from pre-Slavic populations in the genetics of modern Poles. The 2022 Nature study on early medieval Slavic genetics is one of the most important data points we have. But ancient DNA research in Poland and Central Europe is still growing. If you found this video valuable, consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who are passionate about history like this. If you enjoy exploring genetic origins, ancient DNA, and the deeper story of European peoples, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know someone with Polish roots or simply a love for European history, feel free to share this with them. If you have any questions or thoughts, leave them in the comments.